Hello and welcome to What the Hey. Thank you very much for joining me to check out a video that someone suggested I react to, and that person was Pravan Prasannan, so hello to you and thank you once again for the request. The content in question that I'm checking out for today's video is titled The Simple Appeal of Thomas, which was uploaded on December 4th of 2020. The video duration is 17 minutes and 39 seconds, and the video description lists the purpose and participants of the content. And the actual channel that uploaded this video would be Thomas1Edward2Henry3, so if you'd like to check out more of their content or check out the actual video that I'm reacting to, I'll have those sources linked in the description. Also in the description, if there's anything in this content that I feel like someone may or may not want to be warned about, I'll list that there because I'll have watched the video, so I'll hopefully know, so I'll list whatever comes to mind. But anyways, if you want to check that out, you can, but you don't have to. And then another thing that you can look out for is in the comment section. I'll hopefully at some point when I get to it, put a little comment with the different timestamps and segments of this the video itself. So if there's something specific you want to check out or watch, I'll have that listed. You can click it and interact with it and get to what you want to watch. But that is all of the pre-watching video information, so let's actually check out the content itself.
What is this?
A
Seriously,
children's show.
I could draw something better than this on Microsoft Paint.
That's pretty good, actually.
Actually, no. But regardless, I don't have high hopes for Thomas the Emoji Engine, aka Season 25.
Is that
But
really
rather than
Season
go on
25?
about why
Dang.
Thomas sucks like everyone has already done, I think it's more interesting to look at why Thomas the Tank Engine appeals to so many people in the first place. Why is it that so many people who aren't even the target audience have found a connection? Today,
because it's
I'm gonna
about
talk
trains,
about what sets
dude.
Thomas apart from other children's television shows and the formula
Because
that
it's
made it
pretty
work.
freaking epic,
I can
dude.
summarize it with 3 words. It was simple, but also realistic and mature.
That was not
I'm
3
sure
words.
you all have seen or heard many comments from people outside the fandom that the model era of Thomas is creepy because the faces
nostalgic.
of people don't move. And while there are definitely instances where that format creates some creepy sights,
Jump scares,
this was
for real.
actually typical of British children's television shows back then.
Well, the British
First season
suck,
debuted
dude.
in
That's what it is.
1984, when other popular British children's shows included Postman Pat, Fireman Sam, the Wombles, the Clangers, the list goes on.
I've never heard
All
of any
shows
of
had
those.
very limited movement as well.
Except that one.
Mouths
That's
did
pretty,
not move,
you know,
and
fancy.
oftentimes there would be one person doing all the voices.
Because they're
The only
epic.
difference is that Thomas
budget.
was filmed with live model trains, while those other shows were stop motion. This is a huge advantage to Thomas because it gives a realistic feel to it. I'll talk more about realism
They're all
later.
kids shows,
But
though.
this
None of
format
them
also
are
led to the
realistic,
first
but okay.
aspect of what makes Thomas so appealing, its simplicity.
All of them are simple.
Britt Allcroft wanted the show to capture the feel of the Railway series books, and having the static faces did just that. The
Yeah, that's
models look
realistic
like
to
they
the
just
book,
puffed
yeah.
right out of a C. Reginald Dalby painting. It is as if someone is reading the books to a child and they are imagining the pictures moving.
That's
Stories
pretty
also
true.
move at a slow but engrossing pace. It doesn't rely on putting wacky visuals or movement to keep a toddler entertained.
That's just
I've talked
modern
about this
media,
before in my
dude.
Magic
Can't blame
Railroad
anyone
review,
for
but
that.
For some reason, I feel like not having the faces move makes the characters feel more like real trains, as, big shock, trains are machines, not humans. They are not some bio-infused creation.
Oh
that
my
many
gosh,
people
not the
have made
Pulse
parodies
vid stuff.
about. Now,
That's funny,
when the show
haha, though.
switched to full CGI, the faces seemed to match with the environment they were in, so the facial movements here blended well. Unlike Season 12, where they put animated faces over the models.
That's okay.
It just looked kinda off. Static
No.
faces with clear
Oh.
emotions also makes it easier for children to connect with the characters' emotions, which is a reason why many, including
scary.
me, believe the show is connected with so many kids on the autistic spectrum. A child can easily identify a character's emotion and will understand why they feel that way, especially with having the narrator say, "Thomas was very cross."
So it's very
Honestly,
self-explanatory.
Those static faces with a large library
Yeah.
made it easier to comprehend characters' emotions more than something like Barney or even Sesame Street, where the mouth of the puppets only had one movement, up and down. And another thing to add is that the faces had the perfect design. Not too simple, like just putting eyes and mouth on a smoke box, but also not too ultra-human-like. Like,
You have to find the happy
yeah,
medium.
that's why I was never too
They're still
fond
scary,
of
though.
Clive Spong's faces. But you know what I mean. The simple yet expressive facial designs
That's
made
scary.
the trains come to life, yet
What
still
is that?
capturing the overall vibes of a steam train. And that's
Uh-huh,
another
the
major aspect that I
vibes.
think Thomas was best at. Despite being a model series, the crew tried their hardest to make the island of Sodor look like a real place, and boy did they succeed.
Yeah, it looks
The trains
really
may
cool.
have
The
had more
sets are
simpler
nice.
designs, but were still heavily based off of their real prototypes.
That's
They
very
were
true.
certainly not toys, like Chuggington or this piece of garbage.
It's not
Character
meant
design
for
was one
you,
thing,
bro.
the sets
Stop
were what
hating.
made the show. I mean, look at these shots. And these technically weren't even solid model railway layouts. They had to be assembled on a table in a studio for shooting, then broken up to make room for the next
Giant
location.
humans, dude.
I mean,
Scary.
they literally had to use grocery grass in the first season. Not to mention having running
Grocery
water.
grass.
This ultra-realistic vibe was achieved by excellent model making and smoke effects, which for
Determination
small
to
models
make it
looks
look
pretty real.
epic.
Don't get me started on the episodes with fog. I've said this before in other
That's a
videos.
lot of
the
fog,
terrifying
dude.
atmosphere of episodes like Ghost Train or Haunted Henry cannot be replicated even closely with CGI. The physical world allowed for a much more realistic atmosphere when it came to certain environments, like a forest, an abandoned mine, and the bustling
Epic
industrial
music, by
harbor.
the way, in the back.
The model work was so well done that when real-life humans were used for Thomas and the Magic Railroad, they blended in pretty seamlessly. Yeah, I better address that
What
move and
was
get
that?
it over
I've
with, because
never
it does
even
lead
seen
into
it
my
yet.
next big point. I cringe when I think about that review I did a while back, but my general thoughts are still the same. Magic Railroad had good intentions, but the overall concept completely disregarded what made Thomas so appealing to me. The only
Because
thing
the humans
different about
weren't
the island
legit?
of Sodor from our world is that the trains talk. Everything else is pretty normal, and that's what made it so relatable. Especially with the realistic model work, it felt like a real place one could visit, which is what Audrey intended. Magic Railroad treats the universe as some Narnia-like dimension.
I mean, that's kind of what it
nothing
is,
against
though.
Shining Time Station on its own, but it would be interesting to find out if the film had always been intended as a mix of the two, or the studio just wanted to put it in for American appeal. The deleted scenes on the Blu-ray certainly helped the overall narrative, but it did not change my opinion at all that the overall idea of turning Thomas into a magical fairyland is a disservice to what made me connect with the show. Real engines such as the Flying Scotsman and Stepney are just other characters when they venture onto Sodor. Audrey recounted how when he was a child, he would listen to trains going by and the steam engines sounded like they were having a dialogue, such as an engine
Because
pushing
of the
from
whistles?
behind and encouraging the one in front.
Interesting.
I, of course, as well as probably 99% of everyone watching, grew up long after steam trains were out of mainstream service. But I can still see trains of Amtrak or Caltrain having a conversation. Audrey based his stories off of real events, and you might be surprised that Britt Alcroft did the same for most of Season 5.
Goodness
Obviously,
gravy.
Rusty and the Boulder
So many
is
people
probably
are
not a
so-
realistic story, but at the
Yeah,
same
true.
time, it was handled with such seriousness
That's
and
scary.
professionalism that it's one of the greatest episodes of the show.
I
And
don't
that
think
leads
that's
me into
very
my third
serious,
and
dude.
final point, that the classic series was handled with a great level of maturity. Now, when I say mature, I don't mean it necessarily covered sensitive subjects for children, like Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers would. However, Thomas was mature in that it respected its audience. Even in its
No.
darkest days prior to BWBA, at no point in an episode did Thomas speak directly to the audience with some "can you see the blue house" BS.
Oh.
Well, they
Well, that's for,
certainly
like,
had
little
special
kids.
features that were interactive. Thomas let the story play out on its own. In fact, Thomas had way more mature stuff in it than most kids' TV shows.
When?
And I don't just mean dark stuff. Even today, I don't know many people who know the word deputation. And I was
You're
definitely
just talking
the
about,
first kid
like,
my age to know
diction,
what
dude?
dignified or a celebrity meant. The morals
Ah,
of the
so
stories were always
fancy.
applied in a practical way, not being shoved in the children's faces. For example, Henry refuses to come out of a tunnel because all he cares about
And
is
they
his paint
brick
getting
him up.
wet instead of the passengers. So he suffers the consequences of being a lazy
So
ass by being
realistic,
shut up in a
dude.
tunnel.
So
Thomas and Percy
realistic.
are stupid enough to deliberately disobey safety orders, and big shock, get into an accident. Now,
Very
of course, I'm not
relatable.
suggesting that children should find out for themselves why they shouldn't ignore danger signs, but you get the idea. The emphasis on the fact that certain actions have certain consequences is a very important lesson for children.
That's
And
kind
the
of
way
in
it was
every
emphasized
children's
here
show
is
for the
much
most
more
part.
effective than just giving a lecture about what we have learned.
No,
red
VeggieTales
signal,
is
you will crash.
fantastic.
The Fat Controller always seems to be portrayed as this authoritarian dictator by people outside
Correct.
the fandom. While there are definitely some moments where his punishments might be a bit excessive. First of all, you can't really overanalyze something like this in a children's show. But second, have you guys not watched the show? I think the Fat Controller is probably one of the most reasonable authority figures. He punishes engines when they misbehave, yet also
Which is
praises
pretty
them
fair.
for their hard work. Look at the James trilogy from season 1.
James
is
freaking
a narcissistic
sucks.
prick in James and the Coaches,
Yeah.
and the Fat Controller sends him to the shed for days.
That's
However,
tough.
when he does get let out, he does well with the troublesome trucks, and the Fat Controller congratulates him. The arcs of characters like James,
Manipulation,
Thomas, and
dude.
especially Gordon provide a very inspiring message for children that life is a learning process. One episode that I found particularly inspiring was The Deputation. The episode revolves around a theme not so many other children's shows address, constructively but firmly trying to get an idea or viewpoint across to an authority figure. The Fat Controller wants to get rid of either Donald or Douglas, but the other engines
Because
are
he's very
displeased
nice like
by
that.
They all band together and send Percy as their deputation to get the point across to the Fat Controller in a constructive way. And in turn, he decides to change his decision.
Couldn't
While
they
messages
just like
about
run
standing
him
your
over if
ground are
they
common
wanted?
in children's television, especially when it comes to dealing with bullies. The deputation is more about doing so against authority for the sake of persuasion. Now, this is not about trying to undermine authority. The engines don't gang up on the Fat Controller.
That's what I was
and
gonna
hold him
say, just
hostage,
run him over.
but rather try to constructively get their viewpoint across. This is only one of the more mature morals that the show deals with. Another example is with Henry's Forest. I really regret not putting that on my top 20 episode list, but I didn't really like it as a kid. As an adult, however, Henry's Forest is a true masterpiece, and I think it really captures that simple but mature vibe. The forest is not destroyed by human activity like something like the Lorax, but by nature itself. It's absolutely devastating to Henry, but when new trees are planted, he learns that an
Thank
end
you,
can
Trevor.
bring a new beginning. This is a very simple concept, but it is the idea that when one door closes, another opens. That theme could be applied to real life in countless scenarios. Heck, especially
Acclimating to new
apparent during
things
this
is
horrible
scary.
year of 2020. I don't think I need to tell you how gut-wrenchingly emotional the music is in this episode, but I cannot think of any other show that had as much effort put into its music than what Mike O'Donnell and Junior Campbell did with Thomas.
I've not heard either of those names.
Not only is the theme song hella catchy, but they gave each character an iconic theme that just wouldn't get out of your head. To add to that, the themes evolved just as the characters did. I think Percy's the greatest example. His theme in Season 1 is very bouncy and jazzy, reflecting his cheeky persona. But in Season 5, the theme was rearranged to be more determined, as it emphasized Percy's hard-working character in the season. The music
Did they
also
think that hard
brilliantly
about it?
captured
I
the
don't
tone
know.
that the episode needed. The piece in the Diesel is very fast-paced and cartoony, fitting the bat-crazy prank Bill and Ben are playing on Boko. Henry's sad theme captures the despair that he is feeling, while the Flying Kipper emphasizes the winter wonderland of his early morning journey through the snow. And then there's the spooky music. As I've said before, the piece where Henry
Spooky,
first
scary
puffs by the station
skeletons,
and
dude.
haunted Henry is probably one of the scariest pieces of music I have ever heard, period. People who claim
Really?
that Thomas the Tank Engine is a brainless baby show have clearly not seen Season 5. I mean, what other show has
The
a train
scariest
falling
thing
off
in
a
the
bridge
world.
to its presumed death, or engines getting
Probably
saved
a few.
from basically being incinerated, or an engine being left in a shed for years as a landslide buries him? As stated before, the characters are locomotives, not humans, and in real life, machines get scrapped. Audrey kept this
Yep.
dark idea
In the books,
present in
yeah.
the stories, but
Which is
never
kinda
really to
cool.
the point where it was disturbing for the audience. Even
Yeah,
some of
'cause
the
it's
more
kids.
ridiculous ideas were treated with such maturity that it didn't take one too much out of the Sodor universe. Rusty on the Boulder on paper sounds like a ridiculous cartoon cash grab,
'Cause it
but the
is.
episode was given such a haunting atmosphere with a supernatural feel that worked brilliantly.
Why does
Thomas
it
and
have
the
a
Jet Engine
face?
has the complete opposite tone, but it was treated tastefully as just a fun runaway story with some of the funniest moments in the
Filler
show.
episode for
Compare it to
real.
Up, Up, and Away from season 15. Both episodes have extremely ridiculous ideas, but the difference was that a runaway jet engine had a purpose for the story. It used that crazy idea to its advantage. Up, Up, and Away, on the other hand, had nothing going for it.
Is
The
that from
idea
the
of
book
two
or
engines
no?
carrying massive
maybe it's
blown-up
just random.
balloons could have potential for ridiculous humor. Like, what if the balloon took off and floated away with Thomas or Percy? But the problem was that they used this crazy concept for just an extremely bland story about boring friendship drama. In other words, the balloons could have been replaced with anything, and the story would have been no different. I
It's
could go
fine
on
that-
and
oh
on
my
about the
gosh.
Miller era or BWBA for ages, but the major problem with both just comes down to the fact that they are entertainment for entertainment's sake. Season
Yes.
13 through 16 was just recycling the most bland and insufferable plot lines, while BWBA was just about
What is
crazy
that?
visuals
That
and
is
fast-paced
gross.
content. Just use the three strikes
looks like a
formula,
Barbie
replace
animated
the
animal.
characters, and you have a typical season 13 through 16 story. The classic series of Thomas tried to put effort into every one of their stories. Not all of them worked, see my top 8 worst classic episodes, but there are very few episodes that I just despise from that era. Most of those listed in that video are just an extreme meh. Even though Season 5 had some really crazy plots, as stated before, you might be surprised to learn that Britt and David still tried to keep Audrey's tradition of basing stories on real-life events. In Season 5,
it's based off of
they
real
consulted
stuff. Maybe
David
the new
Maidman
stuff
for his
isn't.
stories from his railway experience, and that shows that the two wanted to keep Audrey's tone, mostly. I don't want to get
Fancy.
into some large rant about why the new Thomas sucks, because you all know why. But what was it about the original series that created such a large online fandom of people who are not the intended audience? What made it appeal so much? I asked this exact question on Patreon, and these are the answers I got. For me personally, even though it was a children's show, so much care was given to the little blue tank engine. It was very simple, yet both realistic and mature at the same time, which I can't really say about many other children's TV shows. Both Audrey and the classic series of Thomas took itself seriously. It's always fascinating to see how Thomas is viewed outside the fandom or the target audience. It seems to be either seen as some random crap to keep your toddler entertained, the subject
Correct.
of countless train and drug-related memes. Yeah, remember Thomas the Dank Engine? Or it's just commented on how dystopian the world of Sodor is. While those memes are definitely hilarious, I feel like the positive aspects of the show are never really discussed like Sesame Street. It'd be funny to see it parodied more in shows like Family Guy. The only time I can think of was that Uncle Thomas the Tank Engine. In conclusion, I'm definitely not pleased with how it's being treated nowadays, but no corporate downgrade will ever take away my childhood of dope-ass trains.
Using those words to describe that show is funny. Oh, good gravy. Yeah, having the nostalgia critic in there, that's fantastic. It's a good move. Love the names. Linkin Park Fan 420, by the way. Fantastic name. I like that specifically. So I was actually looking forward to finally watching this video because I do get quite a bit of comments from people being like, why do you occasionally talk about or watch stuff that's related to Thomas and Friends, Thomas the Tank Engine? And those are valid questions. So with my channel, the original intent was never necessarily to talk about or focus on Thomas the Tank Engine. Like, it's never been something that I found super interesting in terms of like, it's a personal hobby of mine. I appreciate it from like an outsider's perspective. But anyways, the main reason why my channel's kind of, you know, touched on it here and there is because even like this channel brought up in their video, Paul's Vids is a channel that was suggested to me a long time ago, and I reacted to, and by this point, a few of their videos, and people kind of requested more, and that kind of turned into watching other fan-made and like actual original and series related stuff related to Thomas and Friends and Thomas the Tank Engine. So that's kind of why my channel has like touched on it and brought it into the channel a few times. So while Thomas the Tank Engine and locomotives aren't necessarily my personal hobby or interest, I can like enjoy and appreciate them from an outsider's perspective. It's just like that type of content has happened on my channel, you know, just because like it's just turned into an occasional thing. It's very fun. But with this video, I think it's very interesting to have someone who's in the actual community give their perspective on why they're confused and kind of like interested in why some people have their perspectives on it from an outsider's perspective, because I could definitely see, like, even from my own point of view, when I started to watch content like that, I had the perspective like, why am I kind of watching this? Because this is related to what I kind of associate as being, you know, a children's franchise. Like, I think a lot of people, a majority of people that aren't in the community kind of have that mindset, because when you think of something like Thomas and Friends, you're like, that's something, you know, kids watch. Especially like the channel was mentioning, one of the more recent series is like an animated thing, and it's definitely marketed towards kids, like definitely. So, you know, it's not necessarily hard, I feel like, if you didn't really grow up with it, to have that perspective that it's something related to kids, because it's obviously, you know, marketed for kids and stuff, so it makes sense. And I definitely do feel like the video comes from a perspective and a bias of growing up with the show, because, you know, when it comes to anything that's like nostalgic for someone, they're going to probably defend it because they grew up with it and they probably appreciate it to some sense and to some degree. So, you know, all the points in this video, I feel like to a degree were valid, but more so from the fact that, you know, they probably grew up with the show and like grew up being interested in it, which is fine. But it's just interesting to hear. I mean, some of the points in the video I would definitely agree with, like the fact that the original model railway series was done the way in which it was, with all the model trains and all the sets and everything, the music, all very fantastic, and a lot of effort was clearly put into them. So, you know, to see that and recognize that a lot of love was put into the show definitely can make you appreciate it, you know, for the effort that was put in it. Whether or not you actually enjoy what the show is about, you can kind of still see that. And I definitely think there is due credit for saying that Thomas the Tank Engine is probably a show that didn't necessarily baby its audience as much as other shows did, because like the channel was saying, they kind of, you know, read a story, because the original series is from books, and the books look really cool. I've never read any of them. I know about them. The art's really cool, kind of like the channel was saying. But, you know, in the episodes and stuff of the model railway series, they kind of like explain and like give the story by reading it out, kind of, and they do have fancy words in there, so that's pretty fun in comparison to some other kids shows where it's like, you know, where is the house, like they were saying, like Dora the Explorer, that kind of thing. So, you know, you have to kind of give credit to a show like Thomas the Tank Engine because they did do that. But, you know, still the perspective that it's marketed towards kids, I feel like is still pretty valid, because it pretty much is, because it's still very simple, although there are detailed, you know, the sets and everything are very intricate, and the show itself is very intricate and very detailed. You know, still the original intent, I'm assuming, was meant for younger audiences. Because as an adult, it's definitely easier to recognize the effort in which it takes to produce a show. But I feel like when you're a kid, you're not really recognizing that. You may be like, oh, the characters, I can see their emotions, and the music is fun, and the episodes can sometimes be fun and happy and scary, but otherwise you're not really going to be thinking that much into it. So there is, in that way, the simple appeal to the show, because it's formatted in a way that's supposed to be pretty basic to understand. So the appeal to the show is there because it's made that way. But, you know, I still feel like it's not necessarily fair to be like, oh, the people who don't know about the show can't have these opinions, even though they're not fully informed. I still feel like it's kind of valid to hear what people outside of any kind of community or interest, like what their opinions are about it, because it can kind of be a fresh insight or whatever, because you can be like, oh, this show, this material, this whatever is so detailed and it's so intricate and it's so freaking awesome or whatever, you know. You can be like that, but if people are still like, it's made for kids, you can't necessarily say that it's not, because especially the newer stuff, it is. So it's like you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. Like, they may be wrong in a way, but they're on the other hand, they're not wrong. But for the actual video, I feel like it was done very well. You know, they were giving their own personal history and kind of experience with the show. Then they were actually giving history in details about the production of the show. But they gave their reasons for why the show is appealing, with it being mature, which I didn't think it was going to go in that direction with like the language that was spoken, which is actually pretty true, because I've seen fan-made videos where the people making the content use fancy words, and I'm like, that's actually kind of cool, because they're, you know, copying the show's format. Like, that's pretty interesting. So the points that were made in the video and the times in which they were made and the way in which they gave, you know, examples for that kind of stuff, I feel like was done pretty well. So I guess in general, with a show like Thomas the Tank Engine and like the 25 or whatever seasons that it has, for some people it's easier to appreciate because they grew up with it, but for some people, outsiders or whatever, they're gonna be like, that's kind of like, you know, kids stuff, which is fine. Both opinions are totally fine, because people have different experiences with it and stuff, so it's fine. And I also think it's a little ironic to hear the channel be like, oh, the new stuff is literally so stupid and it's so cringy. And I mean, looking at it, like the animation, it's obviously, you know, more colorful, more bouncy and everything. So I get it from that perspective, but it's also like, it's still part of the same franchise, and it's still, you know, about locomotives that talk and go on adventures. So it's, you know, it's the same thing, different look, but it is what it is. But that's essentially the reaction video, and once again, if you want to check out the channel that made the video, I'll have them tagged, and then I'll have the video itself linked in the description so you can check out those sources. But I believe that is it, so thank you very much for watching. Bye.